Since we're still in Module 1, we will still be focusing on experimental design and the scientific method, this time with a focus on refining the different elements that are needed to be completed in an experiment. But of course, similar to our previous sessions, a portion of our session for today will be focused on reviewing some of the key concepts from the pre-recorded lectures that I asked you to watch, as well as reading through Hurlburt. Okay, so one of the things that is interesting in the previous lecture is about the limitations of laboratory experiments and how it can affect the conclusions that we draw from them. So for those who are in the Zoom room and are willing to participate in today's recitation so that you can get class participation bonus points for today, is anyone willing to answer our first question? So again, how can the limitations of laboratory experiments, with examples such as temperature or humidity control, affect the ecological conclusions drawn from them? So you can just raise your hand or unmute to try and take a guess. Zell, go ahead.
Hello po, good morning. Uh, I believe limitations of laboratory experiments, let's say temperature, like machines that control the temperature of the test subjects or the things we are experimenting on, may not actually reflect the natural habitat or what are the usual conditions, the living conditions of the uh, beings being experimented on. So, or in the case na masyadong control, masyadong uh, constant ang temperature, it cannot fully replicate what is really happening in the field po.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Zell. So I guess since this is an asynchronous session, if just one person recited, I can perhaps go ahead and proceed to the next one because I think we have more than enough questions for everybody in the session today to recite. But again, thank you so much, Zell. You're absolutely correct. So in the case of the lab, even though we have a lot of control over variables like humidity, temperature, light intensity, and so on, as you said, hindi nila necessarily nare-represent yung natural conditions na meron tayo in quote-unquote the wild. So, ecological processes that are happening in the field kasi naiimpluwensyahan sila ng napakaraming factors, hindi lang yung inaaral natin. And I don't think we have invented all the technology that we need to control all of those possible factors in the lab. So, pwedeng magkaroon ng pagbabago sa weather, pwedeng magkakaroon ng unexpected disturbances. So, this means, therefore, that conclusions based solely on lab experiments, they might not always apply to real-world ecosystems where such variables vary constantly. And actually, the same is true for medicine. Yung mga gamot na tinetest natin in a controlled environment, pag tinest natin siya in tissue culture versus an animal system or even a human system, marami pa rin pwedeng magbago. So, kaya napakaraming steps bago i-allow ang gamot na ilabas into the medical setup just to make sure that everybody is safe if there is permission given to its use. Okay, so next. Napakaraming uri ng experiments na pwede nating gawin when it comes to ecology and also for other disciplines of biology, chemistry, and physics. We can do lab experiments, we can do field experiments, we can also do natural experiments. But as much as possible, we want to make sure it's a combination of those possible types of experiments. But what could be the impact if isa lang yung ginamit mo when you're studying an ecological phenomena? Bakit hindi mag-natural na lang tayo agad or mag-field na lang tayo agad if yun naman pala talaga ang nagre-represent sa actual conditions? Why is it important that we look at or use multiple types? Does anyone want to try and answer this one? Okay, it's okay if you're shy. Pwede naman tayo Dora the Explorer style. Okay, now that you've answered that question, joke lang. So when it comes to looking at or using different types of experiment booths, joke lang, where's the map? Anyway, yun nga, so when you rely on a single type of experiment, pwede mong malimit yung scope and limitations mo, yung generalizability ng findings mo. Kasi ang important sa lab experiments, kaya ginagawa pa rin natin siya, kasi nagbibigay siya ng opportunity na i-control yung conditions. So, mas na iisa-isa natin yung iba't ibang conditions na pwedeng meron sa wild to see kung may effect ba sila at kung meron, ano yung specific effect. And then, pwede rin natin silang ipag-combine sa lab. Now, once medyo naiintindihan na natin yung trends nila sa lab, pwede na tayo mag-move forward sa field experiments kung saan nai-increase yung realism. Pero ang difference kasi ng field versus natural is that yung field, meron pa rin siyang constraints katulad ng uncontrollable environmental factors, pero may certain level of control pa rin siya. Kasi when we say field, um, it's a portion of the ocean na naka-cordon off. It's a portion of the forest na medyo kontrolado natin. So, hindi siya completely wild. Whereas, yung natural experiments, siya yung pinaka-realistic, pero pag biglang bumagyo, wala ka nang magagawa. Pag biglang may ibang hayop na dumaan, wala ka nang ibang magagawa. Pero yun nga, siya yung nakakapagbigay ng pinaka-realistic na data. So we combine different experimental designs para mas comprehensive yung understanding natin, mas strengthen yung scientific conclusions. So gaano ba ka-consistent yung result na makikita natin? Okay, so yun. So sinisimulan natin sa lab para mas ma-figure out natin which factors result to a particular output. Pinapasok natin sa field para mas ma-adjust at maging realistic. And eventually, sa natural, para makita natin yung actual statistics ng output niya. So, kung baga, pagdating sa gamot, yung lab, okay, ano yung impact ng ganitong chemical sa tao? How about this chemical? How about this chemical? Paano pag pinag-combine natin yung chemicals? Okay. Sa field, sige, kumakain na siya ng kahit anong gusto niya. Naglalakad na siya, may activities na siya to a certain extent. And then natural is, hindi mo na masyadong nababantayan kung naiinom ba niya talaga yung gamot. Basta niresetahan mo siya, ano yung nagiging impact nun? So, parang ganun yung differences ng lab, field, or natural, and lahat yun importante para mas makita natin kung ano ba talaga yung tamang conclusion given yung intervention na ginagawa natin. Okay. Now, another video, well, hindi siya video, it's an audio that we attached for lecture 2 is a podcast. And doon na-interview si Sir Al, no? Cute. It's a foreign team na gustong aralin yung coral spawning effects. Pero meron silang na-face na challenges. So, hindi ko muna isa-spill kung ano yung challenge na yun. But this podcast was given to you kasi it highlights the importance of preliminary sampling or observation pag gumagawa ka ng fieldwork. So, ano yung problemang nakaharap nila and bakit nito pinapakita na importante ang preliminary sampling or observation pag may gagawin kang field experiment? Okay? Anybody would like to make kwento kung ano ba yung nangyari dun sa podcast at bakit importanteng nag-preliminary sampling sila? Hey, so that's right, Boots. The joke. So yun, dun sa podcast kasi, gusto nilang makita yung coral spawning ng isang specific na coral species. Pero, nung nag-start na yung spawning, nakaset up na sila, may mga foreign press pa dun sa area. So, sobrang bonggang-bongga niya, no? Ang laki ng coverage kasi it's a big experiment. Tapos biglang maling species pala yung nag-spawn, hindi yung target nila. So medyo fail yung naging activity. So in this case, preliminary sampling or observations become very, very important kasi tinutulungan nila tayong maintindihan yung conditions kung saan tayo nagtatrabaho, and it helps us better plan the methods that we're using. So dun sa podcast, yung coral restoration team faced yung mga issues like yung mali, well, some would argue mali kasi yung gabi na pinili nila kasi baka ibang gabi magsuspawn yung target species. And then, nandun na nga sila, since ibang species yung target nila, mali yung equipment nila para dun sa species na nag-spawn. So if they had done more preliminary sampling, such as, kunyari, tinrack nila yung spawning patterns over several nights, o kaya tinest nila yung gear nila in advance, they might have been better prepared for the situation. So these early steps allow scientists to make more informed decisions. Hindi tayo nag-waste ng oras, ng pera, at ng resources. And syempre, mas malaking chance na sumakses tayo kasi nag-step by the step, no? Bago nag-actual experiment. So yun, hindi pwedeng isang beses mo lang siya gagawin. Minsan kailangan mag-testing ka muna, mag-preliminary observations ka muna bago mo siya actually gawin. So for those in the Zoom, by the way, kung may questions kayo or point of clarification, don't hesitate to ask din, ha? Okay. So next question. I think this is the last one about the recordings, or at least the last one linked to the recordings, and then my next set is already going to help you go through Hurlburt. So this one, how would you approach, let's say, designing an experiment to study the effects of volcanic eruption? So kunwari, one of the biggest things that happened in Luzon during the 90s was the explosion of Mount Pinatubo. And this definitely changed the landscape of Pampanga. Napuno ng lahar ang Pampanga. And in fact, medyo global ang effect ng Mount Pinatubo kasi it deposited so many particulates in the air na nagkaroon ng temporary global cooling. But specifically, you want to see the effects of volcanic eruptions, specifically lahar deposits on vegetation. And maybe you can tell us how you would do it if you were doing it in the lab, if you were doing it in the field, or if you were doing it, let's say, in a natural experiment. Does anyone want to share? Sayang ang bonus points for class participation. Daniel, go ahead.
Doc, sorry po, pero yung sa previous question po kanina, may
Mhm.
question ako sa preliminary sampling po.
Okay, go ahead.
So, paano po malalaman if enough na po yung preliminary sampling po bago po mag-proceed to the actual experiment?
That's actually a pretty good question. Usually, depende sa scope ng objectives mo. Normally for my team, we actually allot, pag nagbabudget kami ng oras tsaka ng resources, we actually allot a budget and time for doing the entire experiment completely. Tapos, para lang makita kung ano yung mga pwedeng mag-go wrong during the execution. Tapos, pag nakita na namin, okay, so magiging problema tong temperature, magiging problema tong setup na meron tayo, ginagamit namin siya para ma-adjust yung actual experiment. Now, in the event, in the very, very rare event na walang mali na nangyari, it means na dagdagan lang yung dami ng replicates namin. So, siniset up talaga namin yung experiment in such that yung first round ay laging preliminary. Hindi pa siya yung actual kasi ino-optimize pa namin siya. Ngayon, ang masaklap, minsan, yung preliminary mo, sobrang daming pwedeng maling mangyari. So pag sobrang dami naman yung maling nangyari, ibig sabihin kailangan ko ng at least 3 rounds. So yung first, yung super preliminary, pag sobrang daming maling nangyari dyan, gagawa pa ulit ako ng isa pang preliminary sampling para umayos pa ng konti yung setup ko. Tapos, pag maayos na siya dun sa second round, saka ko gagawin yung third round. Pero that's also why it's so important to do your RRL, to do, ang tawag dito, interviews with people who've done similar experiments before para masigurado mo na yung preliminary sampling or testing mo, nagawa mo na siya ng tama as much as possible para konti na lang yung i-adjust mo for your actual experiment. So does that help, Linya? Okay, great.
So parang yun po ba yung nagde-determine if we have enough replicates na po?
No.
Ah.
Iba pa yung dami ng replicates mo. So, usually yung dami ng replicates, nakadepende siya sa resources na meron ka. So, kung super basic yung experiment mo, you should have at least 3 para pwede kang mag-statistics. Pero kung gusto mong taasan yung power, pwede kang gumawa ng power analysis. So, it's a specific pre-statistical test that you need to do para mabigay niya yung recommendations ng ideal number. Minsan, kunyari, public health, yung nature ng study, minsan mahirap ma-achieve yung ideal number kasi baka nasa millions or hundreds of thousands yung replicates mo kasi dami siya ng tao na naka-experience ng particular situation. Kami sa ecology, kadalasan, ang ideal number namin is in the range of 20 to 50. Kaya ang magic number, yung tinatawag, is 30. So 30 replicates ang tinatarget namin, 30 organisms, and so on. Pero kung whole ecosystems yung inaaral, kunyari isang buong mangrove forest, naglalaro lang talaga kami sa at least 3. Pero ang pinakamaraming mangrove ecosystems na na-study ko na siguro hanggang 10 lang. Kasi sobrang labor intensive niya. Like, you have to travel to different sites para masabi mong ibang mangrove forest. So magastos, labor-intensive, maraming tao. And yun nga, pag dumadami yung locations mo kasi ecosystem level yung inaaral, dumadami rin yung confounding factors pagdating sa features na pareho or different between those sites.
Okay po, Doc. Thank you po.
Okay. So given that, meron na ba kayong naisip na pwedeng gawing experiment kung itetest natin yung effect ng lahar sa growth ng vegetation? Okay lang naman kung wala, no? So, katulad nung nasabi ko kanina, one of the best approaches here would be to see yung natural, pero syempre hindi pwedeng isa lang. Kung natural experiment yung gagawin natin, inaaral natin kung ano ba talaga yung nangyari dun sa lugar. So, swerte tayo kasi merong region talaga sa Luzon na naka-experience ng, nalagyan siya ng lahar. So, pwede nating i-compare yung vegetation sa areas na naapektuhan ng recent eruption to those in older, dormant volcanic regions. So pag ginamit natin tong method na to, na-observe natin how vegetation recovers or adapts over time in a natural setting. Pero syempre, ang isa sa mga kailangan nating tandaan pag ganito, wala tayong nakokontrol na variables talaga. So, conclusions may be less precise. Kasi paano kung dun sa kabilang area, kaya pala siya nag-recover kasi magaling yung mayor. So, nagkaroon siya ng rehabilitation project. Tapos dun sa kabilang area, hindi siya nag-recover kasi trapo yung binoto na mayor. So, hindi natin yun makokontrol, di ba? So, the conclusions would end up being less precise than in lab experiments. Pero yun nga, ang trade-off is gaining realistic insights into how volcanic eruptions impact ecosystems on a larger scale. Pero kung gagawin naman natin siya sa lab, or even sa field, pwede tayong gumawa ng tinatawag na environment simulation. So magpe-prepare tayo ng plant samples, pero in this case, kailangan may specific species ka na target. Ideally, a native plant species dun sa area na inaaral mo. And then we collect o kaya simulate different soil types. So pwedeng meron kang fresh volcanic ash, older volcanic soil, and then standard potting soil as control. And then set up ka ng treatment groups mo. So group 1 could be plants that are grown in fresh volcanic ash kasi that simulates yung post-eruption. Pero syempre, hindi siya ganun kainit. Syempre, pag kaka-erupt pa lang, mainit, di ba? And then yung second group or second treatment mo would be plants in weathered volcanic soil. So kung baga, ang sinisimulate natin dyan would be the older eruption sites. And then the third treatment could be plants in regular soil. So yun naman yung magiging control group natin. Now, to make sure that we're minimizing confounding variables, we could maintain consistent light, consistent temperature, humidity, and also watering conditions across all groups. And then we can track plant growth, leaf color, like nawawala ba yung capacity nila to photosynthesize, and so on. We can check for root development and overall health over time to assess kung paano ba naapektuhan ng soil type yung vegetation recovery. So, mas maganda talaga pag ipagko-combine yung laboratory approach tsaka yung natural approach para mas magiging conclusive yung magiging data natin. Kaya you will notice, siguro once nag-thesis na kayo or kung nag-thesis na kayo, pag part kayo ng isang laboratory na may mga malalakihang research project, yung mga research na ginagawa ng teams nila have a tendency to be connected to each other para pag pinag-combine nyo yung data ng bawat team na nandun sa loob ng research, mas lumalaki or mas nagiging robust yung conclusion. So, yun yung importance pag meron ka ng sarili mong laboratory. Okay. So now, we move forward to Hurlburt, which I know could be such a headache. So one of the basic questions that Hurlburt would ask is the impact of replication and subsampling on accuracy and replication. So between replication and subsampling, alin yung mas nakakaapekto sa accuracy? And between replication and subsampling, ano yung mas ano daw? Ano yung mas nakakaapekto sa precision? Sorry. Hindi, palitan ko lang yung slide ha, kasi mali siya eh. Which affects precision more. Ayan. Yeah, share natin ulit. There. Okay, so again, between replication and subsampling, which one affects accuracy more? And between replication and subsampling, which one affects precision more? Uy, sayang to, objective ko. Ay, sorry. So, tig-isa na kayo, mag-guess na kayo. Sige, let's start tayo kay Zell. So, Zell, which one affects accuracy more?
I think replication accuracy. I think subsampling po pala
Okay,
affects accuracy more.
And then which one affects precision more?
I think replication affects precision more po.
Okay, sige. How about you? Iisa-isahin ko na kayong tatlo ha. How about you, Daniel? What do you think?
Same po sa sinabi ni Zel na for me, replication po affects the accuracy. And then yung sa precision naman po is yung subsampling.
Okay. Sige. Sheena, how about you?
Same lang din po that replication affects accuracy and then for subsampling precision.
Okay, so actually baliktad si Sheena, no? So, ang sabi niya, replication affects accuracy and subsampling affects precision. So 2 votes, replication affects precision and subsampling affects accuracy. 1 vote, replication affects accuracy and subsampling affects precision. So what is the answer? Okay. So Herbert, isa sa mga unang-una niyang ginagawa dun sa paper niya is to make a key distinction between replication and subsampling. And in-explain niya sa atin kung ano yung ibang pwede niyang maging effect sa accuracy and precision. So siguro para mas ma-clarify natin, replication increases, drum roll, accuracy. Kasi it involves yung paggamit ng multiple independent experimental units. So, tinutulungan tayo noon na ma-estimate yung treatment effects in a more reliable manner. So mas nagiging generalizable yung findings natin. So, alam ko confusing siya kasi ang description ni Hurlburt is that replication helps to account for natural variability. And pag sinasabing variability, iniisip natin agad precision. Pero iba kasi ang natural variability. It's about external validity, no? So, since ina-account ng replication ang natural variability, it actually reduces the risk of drawing conclusions from unrepresentative or anomalous, ano bang tawag doon? Anomalous samples. So may follow-up question ako tungkol dyan later para mas ma-highlight natin. Pagdating naman sa subsampling, it increases precision kasi it provides a more detailed estimate of the response of the organism or the response of the factors that we're studying within an experimental unit. So sa loob ng isang unit. So by measuring multiple times within a single replicate, yung tayo pwede nating ma-reduce yung measurement error. And therefore, mas magkakaroon tayo ng internal consistency. Mas nagiging malinaw kung ano yung internal variability ng unit. But it does not substitute for true replication. So important ang subsampling pero mas important ang replication pagdating sa accuracy. So, yun nga kanina nasabi ko, kaya ang replication ay for accuracy kasi nakakapture niya yung natural variation. So, di ba ang natural variation kadalasan, or ang variation, kadalasan na-associate natin siya sa precision. So, bakit kaya ang natural variation ay mas nakakaapekto sa accuracy but not necessarily sa precision? Can anyone try to explain? Maybe, try to figure out bakit kaya? Okay lang naman kung shy kayo, no? Kasi ito talaga yung pinaka-challenging na portion ni Hurlburt na naguguluhan ng mga tao. So, there are types of variation kasi. Hindi lahat ng variation ay pareho. So, replication, katulad ng nasabi ko kanina, is about capturing natural variation between experimental units. So, kunyari, magkaibang pots, magkaibang tangke, magkaibang plots of land, magkaibang coral patches. Whereas subsampling captures measurement variation within a single unit. So, paulit-ulit mong minimeasure yung weight ng same na glassware. Paulit-ulit mong minimeasure yung coral growth sa same na location sa reef. So, when we look at the definition of accuracy, it's about how close your estimate is to the true value, yung true population mean. Kung gumamit ka lang ng isang experimental unit per treatment, yung estimate mo could actually be biased. Not because your measuring tools are wrong, but because the unit you happen to use might not represent the bigger picture. It might not represent the broader population. So pag nag-replicate ka, it allows you to sample across the natural variability of the system. So sa iba't ibang part ng reef, for example, mas maraming tanks, mas maraming pots of soil. So this actually helps to average out the biases of individual units. So yung treatment effect estimate mo, yung data na meron ka, ay mas likely nire-reflect yung true value or yung true mean. So that's why replication helps you correct for sampling bias. Kasi binabalance out niya yung natural variation na meron across your experimental units. Pero ang precision naman is about how consistent or narrow your estimates are. So, kung baga ang subsampling, importante siya dito kasi it reduces the noise, yung unnecessary variation in the measurement of each single unit. And when we say a unit, we mean a replicate. So, it gives us more precise averages per unit. So, subsampling helps us reduce measurement error. Kaya, nai-improve niya yung precision. So, why isn't replication just about precision too? So, tama naman kayo that more replication can also improve precision in the sense that we get to have tighter confidence intervals around our mean treatment effect. Pero, the unique role of replication is reducing bias due to non-representative sampling, which is all about accuracy. Kasi precision without accuracy, pwedeng mangyari yun, no? Yung highly precise pero hindi accurate. Precision without accuracy can still lead us sometimes confidently to the wrong answer kasi nagkakaroon ka ng systematic bias. Pero replication makes our estimate more correct, so more accurate, while subsampling only makes it more stable or more precise. So does that explanation help? Can you give me a thumbs up if nakatulong yung explanation? Yay! Okay. If you have follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to ask, ha? Okay. So another set of experiments, another example or discussion points ni Hurlbert ay pagdating sa design. So tingnan natin kung medyo naiintindihan nyo na or naguguluhan pa kayo sa portion na to. So let's say meron tayong isang researcher, gusto niyang i-test yung effect ng bagong fertilizer on plant growth. Naglagay siya ng 10 pots sa isang greenhouse at randomly nag-assign ng fertilizer to 5 while yung 5 natitira naging control. Lahat ng pots ay nilagay in random positions dun sa greenhouse. Which experimental design ang nire-represent nito? So, ayan yung choices sa right side. So, what do you think? Zell, go ahead.
I think it shows design type A1 po, completely randomized.
Okay. Sheena, how about you?
I also think that it's completely randomized po.
Okay. And Daniel, how about you?
Completely randomized din po, Doc.
Okay, very good. So, completely randomized design yung pinapakita niya kasi nagkaroon ng random allocation of treatments to individual units. Each pot receives treatment independently of each other. And then, nagkaroon ng proper design by randomly placing them in different positions in the greenhouse para magkaroon ng true replication and independence. So, ang completely randomized design, generally speaking, is considered the gold standard for experimental design. Okay, tingnan naman natin itong susunod na setup. So, meron naman tayong field ecologist. Gusto niyang alamin paano yung shade, yung pagtakip sa araw, affects yung plant diversity. When we say understory, ito yung mga halaman na makikita natin sa ilalim ng mga puno. Yung sa base ng mga puno. So, she divides yung site into 4 plots based on soil type kasi hindi lang iisa yung soil. So, in each plot, nag-randomly assign siya ng 1 by 1 meters, tas yung isa shaded, yung isa unshaded. So, random naman kung alin yung shaded at alin yung unshaded. Pero, may 4 plots siya, depende sa soil. So, anong experimental design kaya ang nire-represent nito? Yes, simulan na. Okay, Daniel, go ahead.
Is it randomized block?
Okay. Sheena, what do you think?
I'm also guessing randomized block po.
Okay. Zell, how about you?
Same with them po, randomized block din.
Okay, good. So what we're seeing here is randomized block design. Kasi yung block dito ay yung soil type, no? So yung soil type, siya yung block, dinivide siya ng 1 by 1 meters, tas yung treatment ay shaded or unshaded. So the treatments that we have, shaded versus unshaded, are randomized within blocks, yung soil, to account for known variation. So ang tandaan nyo, pagdating sa randomized block, each block should contain all treatments. Okay? And ang important dito is it improves yung precision dahil sa block level variation. Kasi bawat block, dahil nga may iba't iba tayong soil type, kailangan ma-neutralize natin yung posibleng effect nito. Okay. Next. How about ito? Meron naman tayong scientist na gustong mag-aral ng effect ng toxins sa isang aquatic environment. Meron siyang dalawang malaking tank. Yung tank A, mayroong chemical treatment, possibly a pollutant, and then tank B serves as control. So 10 fish are placed in each tank, and their behavior is observed daily. The researcher treats each fish as an independent replicate. So which design type is this? So hint, it's a bad design. Pero ano kayang design type ang pinapakita nito? Okay, maybe we can start with Gina this time.
I guess what would be systematic.
Okay, so A3 si Gina. Daniel, what do you think?
I'm not sure po, Doc, if alin po sa is it systematic din po, Doc?
Okay. Zel, how about you?
For me naman po, I think it's B3, isolative segregation po.
Okay. So thank you so much for that. It's okay. Mahirap talagang i-figure out no at the start. Pero in this case, titingnan natin, meron tayong dalawang treatment, chemical at control. Yung tank A, chemical lang siya. Yung tank B, control lang siya. Tapos yung fish, pare-pareho silang nasa loob ng isang tank. So ibig sabihin, hindi sila isolated sa isa't isa. Hindi sila true replicates ng isa't isa. Pseudo replicates sila ng isa't isa. So dahil meron tayong one chamber per treatment and all samples within that chamber are not independent, ang meron tayo dito ay isolative segregation or B3. So tama si Zel. So this is a classic pseudo-replication process where treatment is confounded with the environment. Kasi hindi natin talaga magiging sure if it's the chemical treatment or the absence of the chemical treatment that's affecting the fish. Kasi syempre may interrelationships din sila sa isa't isa that could cause the issues. O kaya kung may random change sa environment nung room, kung nasaan yung tank, pwede niyang maapektuhan yung tank A or yung tank B and mababago na niya agad-agad yung design. So this is a big no-no when it comes to creating experiments kasi una, wala kang replication. Second, nagiging sobrang biased yung experiment mo. Nare-risk mo na pwedeng magkaroon ng interruptions na hindi na magiging conclusive yung research na ginagawa mo. So this does not replace reading Hurlburt, pero siguro just to give a quick summary of each design type that he mentioned in his paper. So for A1, completely randomized design, ang key point dito is yung random allocation of treatments to individual units. So each individual or each unit is a replicate, so it receives treatment independently of others. So this is considered proper design with true replication and independence. Yung randomized block design naman, A2, is an experimental design where treatments are randomized within blocks to account for known variation. Kung alam mong yung background mo, yung premise mo, yung scope ng study mo ay may natural variation na kailangan mong i-account. So each block usually contains all treatments. And again, ang pinaka-important sa kanya, it reduces noise from block level variation. Yung A3 ay systematic design. So this is when treatments follow a regular repeating pattern. Hindi siya randomized. And dahil hindi siya randomized, it's susceptible to confounding factors, especially if there's an underlying gradient or environmental trend. So dahil hindi siya truly randomized, this can introduce bias. And Hurlburt would argue that in a systematic design, hindi true replicates ito. Okay, so ibig sabihin, prone to pseudo-replication din ang systematic design. Kasi nga, wala kang true replication kasi hindi ka nag-randomize. Hindi sila truly independent sa isa't isa. Meron ka ng systematic bias. Now, yung simple segregation naman, B1, yung treatments ay kinakluster together but still spatially separated. So, walang intermixing ng treatment. Merong mga rare experiments kung saan pwede itong maging valid, pero kadalasan ang simple segregation, katulad ng systematic design, wala kang randomization. So dahil walang randomization, walang true replication. So mas nagiging prone din ito sa bias, and therefore pwede siyang mag-lead to inconclusive results. Susunod, ang clumped segregation. This is when treatments are in large clumps with no replication across space. Pag pinakita siya, pwedeng magmukhang, dahil sobrang daming individuals, parang wow, ang dami niyang samples. Pero ang totoong nangyayari dyan, pseudo-replication pa rin siya kasi the treatment is applied at the group level. Sadly, ang daming clumped segregation na ginagawa at the medical level. Kaya ang dami pa rin nating medical treatments na akala ng mga tao nag-work na pero hindi pala dahil mali yung nagiging replication at randomization na nangyayari. Sadly, may mga scientists pa rin kayong maririnig na bakit ba nagra-randomize? Sa ecology lang naman nagra-randomize. Hindi po totoo yun, no? Ang dami po nating failed experiments sa agriculture, sa genetic engineering, dahil hindi po gumagawa ng tamang randomization ang mga scientists. Next, B3. So, napakita na natin yung isang example niyan, yung isolative segregation. So, ang important dito, meron kang separate chambers. Hindi necessarily dalawa lang ha, pwedeng marami, depende sa dami ng treatment. Kunyari, chamber 1 gets treatment A, chamber 2 gets treatment B, chamber 3 gets treatment C, and so on. And then all subsamples within a chamber are not independent. So again, nag-result ito ng pseudo-replication kasi yung samples within the chamber are often treated as replicates kahit hindi naman sila independent sa isa't isa. Next, B4, randomized but with interdependent replicates. So ito, individuals appear randomized but they actually share environmental conditions. So technically, subsamples pa rin sila kasi they have a shared environment. So hindi sila truly independent sa isa't isa. So it's a common design flaw kasi na-assume pa rin na ang subsamples ay replicates. So ang randomization, hindi niya necessarily tinatanggal completely ang subsampling. Ang randomization, hindi niya necessarily nagre-result into true replicates. Kailangan masigurado mo pa rin na pag nag-randomize ka, each sample that you want to be a replicate should be in a completely isolated or a unique environment from the others para hindi sila nakaka-affect ng isa't isa. Finally, B5, yung meron ka lang isang unit per treatment, one tank for treated, one for control. So wala ka replication talaga. So you cannot really infer treatment effects statistically. So wala kang degrees of freedom. So this is generally considered an invalid experiment. So yun yung mga design types ni Hurlburt. Overview lang po yung binigay ko kasi again, as much as possible, you have to read Hurlburt to fully understand the difference of each design type. Okay, kasi marami pa siyang ikukwento, such as yung iba't ibang uri ng pseudo-replication. So right now, I have 4 types of pseudo-replication on the screen. Simple pseudo-replication, sacrificial pseudo-replication, temporal pseudo-replication, and implicit pseudo-replication. So ang example natin ngayon is, meron tayong marine biologist and gusto niyang malaman yung effect ng pollutant by treating one tank with the pollutant and leaving another untreated. So 10 fish are placed in each tank and their growth is measured after 2 weeks. So the fish are treated as individual replicates in the statistical analysis. So anong uri ng pseudo-replication ang pinapakita natin dito? Simple, sacrificial, temporal, or implicit? Maybe we can start with Zell.
I think simple pseudo-replication po.
Okay. Daniel, what do you think? Ay, wala si Daniel. China, how about you?
Paul din po, since the fish are treated as individual or independent replicates.
Okay, so everybody's correct. This is simple pseudo-replication kasi we only have one experimental unit per treatment and the multiple measurements taken within those units, within each tank, is incorrectly treated as if lang talaga, they are independent replicates. So, ang problem dito, yung treatment, yung presence ng pollutant is applied at the tank level, not at the fish level. So, all the fish within the tank share the same environment and treatment exposure. So, while there are 10 fish per tank, there's only truly one replicate per treatment, yung tank, yung experimental unit. If we compare fish from different tanks, we're not comparing independent treatment applications, just subsamples within each treatment. So remember, Hurlburt defines simple pseudo-replication as using only one experimental unit per treatment, but treating subsamples within each unit as independent replicates. So this is exactly what's happening here. So 1 tank per treatment equals 1 true replicate per treatment. 10 fish per tank means we have 10 subsamples, so they're not independent replicates. So if you treat each fish as replicates, this inflates the apparent sample design, pinapalaki mo kahit wala naman, and it makes the statistical results invalid. So siguro, ang better design dito is we use multiple tanks per treatment. So at least 3 para pwede kang mag-statistical analysis. Pero kung may budget ka pa for more, pwede kang mag-power analysis to see kung gaano talaga karaming tanks yung dapat. And you have to treat each tank as a replicate. And then yung mga fish, kung maraming fish sa loob ng isang tank, you have to treat them as subsamples para hindi ka mag-commit ng pseudo-replication. Sige, isa pang example. This time naman, nag-aaral ka ng paano babaguhin yung soil or papagandahin yung soil para ma-improve yung plant growth. So you have 4 plots. And then, dun sa 4 na plots na yon, tig-2 per treatment. So each plot has 10 plants. And after collecting growth data, ina-average yung 10 plants per plot, and then i-compare yung 2 treatments using a t-test. So may pseudo-replication pa rin dito. What type of pseudo-replication do you think is happening? Daniel, maybe you'd like to guess?
Guess lang po, Doc. For me, sacrificial.
Okay. Zell, do you agree or disagree?
I agree with her po.
Okay. So that's right. This is sacrificial pseudo-replication because of how the experimental units and subsamples are handled in the analysis, not necessarily dun sa design. So, ang problem, yung plot is the correct experimental unit, so that's good. Treatments were applied at the plot level kasi. Pero, you only have technically 2 replicates per treatment. So, yung pag-average ng subsamples, okay naman yun. Pero, using only 2 values per treatment in a statistical test, so in this case, it's a t-test, means that the test is underpowered or the degrees of freedom are minimal. And it would be worse if she includes all 10 subsamples in the test, as if there are 20 independent replicates per treatment. Kasi again, that would inflate the sample size, leading to false confidence results. So yun, pseudo-replication talaga yun. So bakit ito sacrificial pseudo-replication? So tingnan ulit natin yung definition ni Hurlburt. So ang definition niya ng sacrificial pseudo-replication is yung means of the subsamples within experimental units are used, but the number of true replicates is ignored or misrepresented in the statistical test. So that's exactly what's happening. So the subsample data is collapsed into means, and the true number of replicates is too small. So dalawa lang. Pero meron pa rin siyang statistics na ginawa as if there's enough replication. Ideally, hindi kasi gagana yung t-test kung dalawa lang yung replicates mo. So pwedeng meron siyang ginawa dun sa representation ng data para gumana yung t-test. Kaya sacrificial pseudo-replication yung nangyari. So let's go through one more example. Okay, so ito naman effect ng herbicide. So naglagay siya ng herbicide sa isang forest plot and mineasure niya yung plant diversity monthly for a year. This time, she treats each month's measurement as an independent data point when comparing diversity before and after treatment. So what type of pseudo-replication does this represent? Zell, what do you think?
I think po it's temporal pseudo-replication po.
Okay, Daniel, do you agree or disagree?
I agree po sa kay Zal.
Okay, so correct. This is temporal pseudo-replication kasi yung same experimental unit is measured repeatedly over time. And yung mga inulit na measurements are incorrectly treated as independent replicates. So ang problem dito is that all measurements that were taken for the study, nanggagaling lang sila sa iisang plot. Meaning, meron lang talagang isang experimental unit. So you have to remember that time points are not necessarily independent replicates. They're basically repeated measures of the same unit. So treating them as independent inflates the sample size. So pinapalaki nyo yung problema. Joke lang. Pinapalaki nyo yung sample size na meron kayo. And it violates the assumption of independence. Kaya nagkakaroon ng temporal pseudo-replication. So tandaan natin, ang definition ni Hurlburt ng temporal pseudo-replication ay yung paggamit ng repeated measurements over time from a single experimental unit as if they were independent replicates. So yun yung nangyayari sa situation na to kasi meron ka lang isang plot per treatment. So meron ka lang isang experimental unit per treatment. Meron ka ngang 12 time points kasi may 12 months in a year, pero repeated observations lang yon. So hindi siya dapat inanalyze as 12 independent units. Siguro, ang mas magandang approach dito is to use yung tinatawag na repeated measures analysis. So merong special type na ANOVA na pwedeng gawin ito, o kaya pwede kang mag-mixed of effects model. Or, i-replicate mo na lang talaga yung experiment, meaning meron kang multiple forest plots receiving the same treatment and then compare among them para mas masimplify mo yung situation mo. So, just to go through an overview of these 4 general types of pseudo-replication, again, pag simple pseudo-replication, meron ka lang talagang isang experimental unit per treatment. Pero yung multiple measurements mo na subsamples ay tinitreat as independent replicates. So kunwari, meron kang treated pond and meron kang control pond, tas each pond will have multiple fish. So pag yung fish, tinreat mo sila as replicates, mali ka. Kasi ang common flaw ng simple pseudo-replication is yung treatment and experimental units are confounded. Kasi wala talagang true replication, walang true independence. Yung susunod, sacrificial pseudo-replication. So again, this is when subsamples within a treatment unit are averaged, and those averages are then used in statistical tests as if they were true replicates. And kadalasan, this is when the true number of replicates is misrepresented. So example, Meron kang 2 tanks per treatment, many fish per tank, but tank averages are compared using a test that assumes more than 2 replicates. So in this case, meron kang replication, but statistical analysis ignores the true number of replicates. Next, temporal pseudo-replication. So multiple measurements are taken from the same experimental unit over time, and they are treated as independent replicates. So ang example natin dyan is measuring the same plot every day after treatment and using those measurements as independent data points. So ang problem is yung temporal structure ay ini-ignore natin. Kasi iniisip natin na porket magkakaibang oras natin siya tinitake, nagiging independent na sila sa isa't isa, when in fact, nagtutuloy-tuloy lang naman yung changes sa kanila. And then lastly, we have implicit pseudo-replication, wherein experimental units are not clearly defined or described. So meaning, pinapag-assume mo yung reader, yung panelists mo, na baka meron naman silang replication, hindi lang sinabi. So replication is implied rather than described and real. So for example, a study vaguely mentions multiple samples per treatment but doesn't clarify how they were randomized, paano sila naging independent sa isa't isa. So hindi sila properly defined. So dahil hindi malinaw yung pagkakadescribe dun sa experimental design, pwedeng may mga maling assumptions yung reader. So yun yung tinatawag nating implicit pseudo-replication. Okay. So before moving forward, gusto ko lang i-remind again ang ating class na ang proseso ng science ay yung pag-disprove ng all possible explanations to a phenomenon until we are left with the most likely. Kasi kung titignan talaga natin ang science, imposibleng i-prove ang isang theory. Kasi kung pag-prove ang gusto nating gawin, laging may possibility na meron tayong insufficient evidence or pwedeng hindi pa lang dumadating yung pang-contradict, pero pwede siyang dumating in the future. Kaya ang ginagawa natin ay ang pagdi-disprove. Now, ang isa pang dinescribe ni Hurlburt sa kanyang paper ay ang difference ng mensurative at manipulative experiments. So, ang mensurative, they focus on making measurements at specific points in space and time without imposing any experimental treatments. So, in these experiments, ang variables natin kadalasan ay space at time lang or kung ano man yung natural variation na meron sa field. And basically, all experimental units are treated equally. If we contrast this to manipulative experiments, they involve the application of 2 or more distinct treatments na kinokontrol natin. And yun nga, different experimental units receive different treatments. So these treatments are assigned randomly and interspersed across space and time para ma-minimize natin yung bias. So kung ikukumpara natin ang manipulative sa mensurative experiments, manipulative experiments actively impose experimental factors to observe their effects. So kung baga sa mensurative experiment, nanonood lang tayo. Naghahanap tayo ng natural variation na pwede nating magamit as a means to observe different responses or different effects. So malinis na river versus dirty na river. Hindi naman natin pinadumi yung river, di ba? Madumi na siya nung nakita natin. Iko-compare natin yung biodiversity nila. Mainit versus malamig na city. Hindi naman tayo yung nagpalamig sa city. Malamig na siya. So, pinapanood lang natin. Yun ang mensurative. Ang manipulative is malamig na tank versus mainit na tank. So tayo yung nagpalamig at nagpainit ng tank. Maduming tank versus malinis na tank. So tayo yung nagpalinis at nagpadumi ng tank. So yun yung manipulative. Tayo yung nagko-control. Yung mensurative, naghahanap tayo ng naturally existing sa ecosystem, sa environment, and kino-compare lang natin sila. Now, apart from different types of experiments, syempre, mention din ni Hurlbert ang iba't ibang confounding variables. So, ang confounding variables or potential sources of confusion in an experiment, ay ibig sabihin, nag-exist sila na pwedeng ma-prevent na magkaroon ka ng maayos na conclusion. So, ang pinaka-common na confounding variables ay yung tinatawag nating non-demonic intrusions. So, they introduce yung mga effects or influences na hindi natin gusto, and they can affect the outcome of the experiment. Pero hindi naman kasi sila yung focus ng study natin. So, they're like a type of external factor that are uncontrolled or unmeasured that can bias the results. So, they're actually similar to the way, non-demonic intrusions refers to external factors that interferes with the experiment. So, para maiwasan natin ang non-demonic intrusion, kailangan natin ng tamang experimental design to help control for confounders. So, marami tayong lab experiments na pag-uusapan kung paano i-control ang non-demonic intrusions. Now, another issue would be non-random sampling or assignment. So, pasok dyan yung experimenter bias, tsaka lack of true replication. So, non-random sampling or assignment occurs pag yung experimental units natin ay hindi randomly selected or assigned. So, this can lead to bias, and yun nga, kaya siya closely related sa experimenter bias, kung saan yung researcher ang nagde-decide whether intentionally or unintentionally ng magiging treatment ng isang sample, and so dahil doon nai-influence mo yung outcome ng research mo. So it results to lack of true replication kasi yung treatment groups are not adequately randomized or independently replicated. So this lessens the validity of the result. Okay. Next, meron din tayong tinatawag na temporal and spatial variability. So, pasok dito yung temporal change. So, temporal and spatial variability refers to yung mga pagbabago-bago sa environment or experimental units na hindi natin nakokontrol. And yun nga, pwedeng ma-influence nun yung results. So, pag sinabi nating temporal change, it directly addresses variability over time. Kunyari, umiinit yung room over time. Or lumalamig siya kasi yung aircon. So, this can unintentionally interfere with your experiment. And so, kailangan ng proper randomization and replication across time and space para ma-minimize yung effect nito. So, napaka-important niyan pag nasa experiment na kayo ng glasswares. Okay, and then there's measurement error, which comes in sa procedure effects. So, measurement error occurs when meron tayong mga inaccuracies in how data is recorded or how measurements are taken. So, related siya sa procedure effects kasi doon natin nakikita yung inconsistencies kung paano ginagawa yung experiment. Pag hindi mo sinusunod yung instructions, pag magkaiba kayo ng groupmate mo ng ginagawa. So, pag inconsistent yung methods kung paano kinokollect yung data, nagkakaroon tayo ng variability dun sa results na walang kinalaman sa hypothesis natin. Kaya napaka-important na sinastandardize natin yung procedures, nagpa-practice tayo, nagpe-preliminary sampling tayo, para ma-ensure natin na lahat tayo sa group, and kahit tayo mismo as a person, consistent yung measurements natin para mabawasan yung measurement error. Of course, meron din tayong inconsistent experimental units dahil sa initial or inherent variability among experimental units. So, kunyari, naturally lang talagang magkakaiba tayo ng characteristics. May mga halaman na mas matangkad or mas maliit, pero pareho naman sila ng species. So, this can introduce variability that makes it difficult to detect true treatment effects. So, yung natural differences among experimental units, meron naman talaga yan at the start. Kaya napaka-important na damihan yung replicates, magkaroon ng interspersion ng treatments, and maraming observations. Pwede rin gumawa ng blocking para mas maging maganda yung comparability across groups. Pero, at the end of the day, meron pa rin talagang mga bagay na hindi natin makontrol, katulad ng demonic intrusions. Ito yung mga bagay na hindi natin ma-explain, intentionally ginagawa ng ibang tao para guluhin tayo, competing interests, sabotage, or talagang hindi natin ma-explain kung bakit siya nangyari. So, to avoid demonic intrusion, exorcism, human sacrifice, wag naman. Pero I think it's about vigilance, tamang oversight, preliminary experimentation to test kung okay ba yung location ng pinagagawa natin ng experiment para masigurado siya na hindi makaka-apekto sa study natin. So yun. So given all of that, so napaka-important kasi ni Hurlbert para sa ating homework. So introduce ko na yung homework natin. So important yan sa Thursday. So ayan, picture. So in many parts ng ating bansa, lagi tayong nakakakita ng mga old rice fields, yung mga dating tinataniman ng palay, pero hindi na sila fina-farm ngayon. So yung mga abandoned rice fields na to, mas nagiging common sila kasi, yun nga, may mga taong lumilipat na sa city, nagpapalit na ng trabaho, o kaya nagkakaroon ng challenges like water shortages, nagkakabagyo, bumabagsak yung presyo ng bigas, and so on. So some of these fields eventually grow back into forests, but others stay covered in grass for many years. Tapos hindi na talaga sila tinutubuan ng puno. So this raises an interesting ecological question. What stops trees from growing in these places? So understanding what happens to abandoned rice fields are important kasi these lands could become important habitats for wildlife. Pwede rin silang makatulong sa climate change by storing carbon o kaya i-restore for future use. But first, we need to understand why do they change in different ways. So usually sa part na ito, tinatanong namin yung students namin, ano kaya sa tingin niyo yung reason? So since we at least have 2 students in the Zoom call right now, you have first dibs on possible reasons. Again, you don't have to say too many. Actually, you just need to say one. And yung reason na yun should be something that you can test in the lab or through an experiment. So, sige. Zel, what do you think? Ano kaya yung isang possible reason kung bakit hindi tumutubo ang puno sa abandoned rice fields?
I think po it's because of the lack of seeds or like trees in the vicinity po. Kaya hindi po natubo yung mga puno.
So, walang naglalagay ng buto na tutubo. So, kung walang buto, walang tutubo.
Opo.
Okay. For trees. Okay, so pwede natin pag-eksperimentohan yan. Daniel, ikaw, what do you think?
Doc, for me po, siguro po yung sa soil nung rice fields.
What about the soil specifically kung magagawa ka ng experiment?
Itetest po yung type ng soil and then yung nutrients po na meron dun sa soil. If possible ba na mag-grow dun yung plants or hindi.
Okay. So baka yung soil type tsaka yung nutrients ay hindi nababagay sa pagtubo ng puno. So normally, pag ganito, bawat student sa class, as in every single member of class will be asked, ano kaya yung reason kung bakit walang tumutubong puno? So, from there, so lahat kayo may binigay na reason, ang homework is for you to design an experiment to determine yung role na binanggit nyo on tree growth. So, kailangan meron kayo ng mga ganitong factors. So, screen cap nyo na kasi hindi ko yan ipopost separately. Yung classmates nyo kailangan umabot sa portion na to ng recording bago nila makita. So you need to have a working hypothesis, a null hypothesis, an experimental objective, a sampling domain, factors of interest or response parameters, factor levels, experimental units, levels of treatments, a rough description of the physical layout or pwede ring drawing, approximate number of replicates, subsamples kung gusto nyo, statistical analysis to be used, and then your scope and limitations. So hindi kailangang sobrang haba. Ideally, yung sagot nyo dito kasya lang sa isang slide. Next meeting, some of you, if not all of you, will be asked to present that slide in order to avoid deductions in your class participation grade. So this is more of a homework that you have to do. So automatic, may score ka na sa class participation. Pag hindi mo siya nagawa, kung either hindi ka nakapag-recite or hindi ka nakapag-submit, may deduction ka sa class participation mo. So you have to do this in preparation for Thursday. Okay? Now, apart from that, meron din tayong quiz the Thursday. Ang coverage ay lectures 1 and 2 and also Hurlburt. So I hope everybody comes prepared for that. So more or less, that's it for today. Thank you so much, Daniel, Zel, and Sheena. Kanina, I think baka naputo lang yung connection for attending. But before I close, do you have any questions or points of clarification? Zel, go ahead.
So, kailangan ko ba sundin yung sinabi ko kanina? Or
Um,
pwede ko palitan?
Pwede mo pa namang palitan. Pero
Okay.
just make sure it's simple, just one particular factor.
Sige po. Thank you po.
Okay. So if none, thank you so much. Good luck po sa pagboto. Kung nakapagboto na, good job. And I'll see you all on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you po.